February 15th, 2023. Well, it looks as if the Russian offensive is gaining a little bit of momentum in Ukraine. However, it still seems to be in its earlier stages. We haven't seen a whole lot of movement on the ground yet. It seems basically reports I seem to trust the most, particularly those from like history religions, shows that the Russians are coming closer to the basically encircling Bakhmut. It's getting to where the roads in and out are getting cut off, and there's only like one that's really completely clear right now, as far as I can tell. Some of them are just under, basically, you can't drive down them without coming into fire from various positions the Russians have set up. Others are literally overrun. So we'll have to wait and see here as to whether or not the Ukrainians decide to pull their forces out, or or do they stay too late and actually lose a lot of them. They're probably going to be pulling them out, I would assume, in order to fight another day at a defense line that they're preparing further back. And so that's kind of, it seems to be what's happening. Obviously, there's a lot more artillery and air activity going on from the Russian side. And there's, of course, the Ukrainians are pushing back as best they can. There is ongoing fear, and it's being expressed by NATO, that we're running kind of dangerously low on ammunition, and we're kind of wondering, to be able to support both the reserves that we would need for our own defense and also to keep the Ukrainian tempo of artillery fire and so forth up to the pace it would need to be. So anyway, that's kind of the situation. I want to get a few things on there. I guess the big discussion is the fact that there is reports that the Russians are warning that apparently the U.S. has been training terrorists in Syria to launch attacks inside of Russia, and that U.S. People should be wary, I guess, a bit of this risk or something. And there's other warning from the U.S. side that U.S. citizens should leave Russia because of the possibility that they will end up being held maybe on some kind of trumped up false charges, which is very possible, I think, in this environment. So anyway, that's kind of the thing that's going on. And then of course we're waiting for this Russian offensive, which appears to be growing likely. There's a lot of Russian troops that are not fully committed right now. Now, partly they may be waiting for the Ukrainians to make a move, but it's generally thought now the Ukrainians will not launch a major offensive until the promised Western tanks show up and have been integrated into their military. And so those haven't really arrived on scene yet. So, we'll have to see how that goes. But if you like these videos, please give me a like. It sure helps out with the algorithm. And of course, you can subscribe if you haven't already. So that's kind of the way we see it. And there's also a Russian missile or airstrike that did some damage to the rail system, which is necessary to bring all these Ukrainian supplies to the front line. And that was another development that occurred. Meanwhile, we're having claims on the Ukrainian side that they're inflicting vast casualties on the Russian forces. And I tend to think that some of these are completely inflated and are propagandistic, probably proportional to the level at which things are really going bad as on the front line. A case in point is about, was it a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, there was an attack around Voldivar in the south of the front, and it was conducted by, I think it's the 155th Russian Naval Infantry Brigade, and this has gotten a bit of notoriety. At the time, the reports I saw, including things from history legends, indicate that there was an attack that was made, and it was repulsed. Okay, and the claim is that something on the order of 30-ish vehicles were either destroyed or lost or abandoned or something. obviously the unit's attack failed and they retreated, and their claims the casualties were somewhere around 70 KIA and some wounded, I guess. That's my understanding of what the real event was at the time. Since then, the Western media, and probably egged on by Ukraine's information ministries, have continued to rehash the subject, and now the latest version was the entire brigade, 5,000 men, were wiped out. And I'm not even sure that that brigade ever had 5,000 men in it in the first place. I mean, that's a little heavy. A U.S. Army brigade combat team, as we define them now, which is a reinforced brigade, which includes the brigade and elements of what would have traditionally be considered division trains, such as the artillery battalion and various engineering and signal and reconnaissance other units, are all put together at the brigade level, so the brigades can be independently deployed to different zones of combat, which kind of became a thing during the Iraq and Afghan wars. Well, so that might be somewhere close to that number, but I don't think these Russian units are nearly as heavy as that to begin with. So, I mean, it's all sort of, you can see that systematically, first of all, that the attack was repulsed. The British claimed, I think, 31 armored vehicles. At first, it was tanks, but then it turned out no, it was armored vehicles. That includes your infantry combat vehicles, which are a lot cheaper and less armored than tanks, and more likely the kind of vehicles that a unit like that would have most of its people riding in. They did run into some heavy drone attack, apparently, and the Ukrainians put up a stout defense and repulsed this attack. But now this is being turned into some kind of major disaster or something, like it's going to have I mean, obviously it's a setback in the Russian war plan, and if they'd been successful in taking the city, that would have been, a big thing for them. Since they failed and took casualties, it's a bad thing for them, a good thing for Ukraine. But you have to sit there and go, the way this is getting increasingly escalated out of control, in terms of the way it's being presented is just the thing I'm trying to emphasize, that you have to be very suspicious of these Western reports. Since we really don't get to see much of what Russia's telling its people, I suspect they're equally bogus. But since we don't even see what they are, it's hard to know. But knowing Russia's history, I would tend to think that. But the point I'm getting at is that the reasonable estimates indicate that, let's say, since the front line stabilized maybe 3 months ago, I think the casualties have been much harder on the Ukrainians than they've been on the Russians. In the early days of the war, during the big run to Kyiv and so forth, as I said, that's a kind of an ambush alley, and of course they probably were taking the most casualties in that environment. But since that time, things have kind of evolved where they're the ones the Ukrainians are the ones that had to do the most offensive. Lately, the Russians are on the offensive, and so their casualties will now grow, obviously. But I think that maybe there's a lot of exaggeration. One thing I keep hearing is untrained Russian troops, and I'm like, well, again, this gets back to the whole issue of what the Russian troops really are. The mobilization of at least 300,000 and perhaps more, and plus some volunteers that came in as well, have reinforced the Russian army, of course, and well, I put it this way, is this is always being termed, I mentioned before in other videos, they refer to these people as conscripts, but they're not conscripts. I mean, they're not like civilians that were just taken out of civilian life and put in uniform. These people are people that had completed their service in the Russian army previously, and they're quite what we would call independent reservists, I'd say. In other words, they're not like the National Guard that are formally, organized into units with equipment and regular training schedules. They're not like that. They're more like people that served their term in the regular army, and then they simply left the service, didn't re-enlist, and now they're in civilian life for a few years. But they theoretically could be recalled, particularly within a 6-year period in the U.S., but Russia has a little bit longer period. So, well, these guys, when they first come back, will be rusty. Their PT probably won't be like what you'd want. They may not be really up to the shooting skills they might have had previously, etc. But they're not like people that would be given a rifle and not know what to do with it. Okay, I mean they've been put through months of training now. So I think that the idea that these guys are really um, that unprepared, I think, is a bit of a mistake. Um, there have been instances, of course, earlier, I don't want too much time on it, during the period right after the fall of Kherson, where, yeah, they were kind of desperate to get people in there, and they did throw some people in pretty quick without adequate preparation just to fill up the gaps. But as I understand it, the Ukrainians do a lot of that too, and that they have a lot of people that have been conscripted and thrown into the front line very fast without much preparation, and have had some pretty bad results. And given that about 3/4 of the casualties are generally due to artillery and a siege warfare like we're looking at here, and given that Russia is firing about 3 times as many rounds per day as the Ukrainians are, I think that might give you an idea what the recent casualty totals have been more likely to be. So at any rate, it looks like that a big offensive, even according to NATO and Ukraine, and is pending, and we're not sure exactly what that will consist of. It could be a pincer movement to try to kind of encircle the Ukrainian forces that are in the east that are currently fighting along that whole line. If they can come up from the south through Zaporizhia and from the north through Kharkiv and break into the rear echelon of this and encircle these units, they would be a major victory for the Russians. If the Ukrainians can block that with heavy casualties and prevent it from occurring, there'll be a major victory for Ukraine. So that's kind of what's offing at the present time. And the big debate, I think, is anything else pending? There's been some discussion of Russia launching an attack in the western part of Ukraine, particularly, I think, moving south to try to cut off supply lines from Poland. Other ideas have been floated, which I like attacks on NATO countries like the Baltic states, but I really don't see that happening. I don't think they want to expand the war to have a full-scale official war with NATO. I think that'd be a big mistake on their part, and I don't think they're that crazy, if you will. So that kind of outlines my view on that at the moment. That we're President Biden is heading to Poland, I think, to be there for the anniversary of the I think the 20th through maybe the 24th. I forget exactly how many days he's staying. I can't believe he stayed 4 days there, but somebody said that. At any rate, he'll be there right before the anniversary of the Russian invasion. And I'm not sure whether this is supposed to have a deterrent message or just to show solidarity. I mean, that's pending. There apparently has been a fair amount of reconnaissance activity going on, watching what's going on in the western regions of Belarus, from which such an attack might be launched. So, and there are preparations on the Ukrainian side of planting minefields, and there are units that have been deployed in the area to fight such an invasion if it were to occur from that direction. So that's kind of where we're looking at. But I think for the moment it looks pretty bad for the Ukrainians at Bakhmut. And the south, they're still holding out. But it looks like the whole line is inching forward. The Russians are inching forward all across the front, from north to south, but not very far and not very fast, which means the resistance is strong, and the Russians are being cautious at this stage, obviously. So anyway, that kind of, there have been a few aircraft incidents. I've heard of a couple of Ukrainian planes being shot down that were trying to attack the Russian positions. So it kind of gives you a little play on. Anyhow, that's kind of that. I think we need the next couple of weeks. We'd have to focus on what's going on in there. I want to mention also, I mentioned this thing about the terrorist thing. That was a Russian report, and I'm skeptical of its truth because Russia makes up stuff. But I do think that you can't totally rule this out either. Who knows what's going to happen? I mean, there have been a variety of incidents that look like sabotage occurring in Russia. I presume I'd attribute that more to Ukrainian special services than anything else. But anyway, so and there may be, I don't know, just distant elements in Russia, that could be stirring up some trouble. And there's that's an area that we don't really have a lot of insight into. On the domestic front, I might want to mention that, of course, this whole train wreck at Palestine uh, Ohio is getting a lot of news, and it looks like the U.S. government's done a very poor job of protecting the people there, and have given people false assurances they should go back without proper testing for the toxicity of the gases that released and that train wreck. And it is an interesting question whether the decision to burn the chemicals that were released was a good idea or not. It's certainly creating a lot of aerial contamination, and we have to just take a look at that. And uh, personally, if I was there and had the money not to go back, I don't think I'd want to go back, or at least to live there. Maybe go back to check on things or something. But I don't know. It sounds scary to me. And the thing is, the EPA has had a history of in these disasters kind of minimalizing the damage. Um, and since this is apparently kind of a conservative Republican area, maybe the Biden administration isn't too careful to take good care of them. Anyway, well, whatever. So, at any rate, I'll be wrapping this up for now. By the way, as always, I will, of course, be posting this on Rumble as well as on YouTube here. And of course, the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below. As always, I do tend to post fairly frequently on Twitter, and kind of get my more recent ideas on a variety of topics, not just this one. So I'll wrap this up for now, and until next time.